Elvis was driving through downtown Memphis when he noticed a postal truck parked in an alley with someone moving around inside after hours. Curious about why a mail truck would be there so late, Elvis pulled over to investigate. When he knocked on the back door, it opened to reveal a makeshift living space and a familiar face that made Elvis's hands shake. It was Joe Henderson, the mailman who had delivered Elvis's first record contract from Sun Records 20 years earlier, now 63 years old, and secretly living in his mail truck because he had nowhere else to go. What Elvis discovered about why this beloved postal worker was homeless would break his heart. But what he did next didn't just save one man's dignity. It revolutionized how America treats its postal employees. It was September 12, 1974, and Elvis had been driving aimlessly through Memphis, trying to clear his head after a difficult recording session. As he passed through downtown around 9 p.m., something caught his attention in a narrow alley behind the main post office. A white postal truck was parked there with its back door slightly open, and Elvis could see light coming from inside. At first, he assumed it was just a mail carrier finishing up a late delivery, but something seemed odd about the situation. Elvis parked his car and walked toward the postal truck. As he got closer, he could hear someone moving around inside, along with the sound of what seemed like cooking or meal preparation. That definitely wasn't normal for a mail truck. Elvis knocked gently on the back door. "Hello? Everything all right in there?" The sounds inside stopped immediately. After a long pause, a voice called out, "Just finishing up my route, nothing to worry about." But Elvis recognized that voice immediately, even though it sounded older and more tired than he remembered. "Mr. Henderson? Joe Henderson? Is that you?" The back door of the postal truck opened slowly, revealing a man Elvis hadn't seen in over 15 years. Joe Henderson had been the mail carrier for Elvis's neighborhood from 1948 to 1965, and he was the one who had delivered the most important letter of Elvis's life. Now, 63 years old, Joe looked embarrassed and ashamed as Elvis saw the inside of his mail truck. Joe had converted the cargo area into a small living space with a sleeping bag spread on the floor, a small camping stove, and his few personal belongings organized neatly in corners. "Elvis Presley," Joe said quietly. "I never expected to see you again, especially not like this." "Mr. Henderson, are you living in your mail truck?" Joe's face reddened with shame. "Just temporarily, Elvis, just until I figure out what's next." Elvis climbed into the back of the postal truck and sat down across from the man who had been such a constant, reliable presence during his childhood. "Mr. Henderson, tell me what happened. How long have you been living like this?" Joe looked around at his makeshift home and sighed deeply. "About 6 months now, ever since I lost my apartment." To understand why this discovery hit Elvis so hard, we need to go back to July 19th, 1954. Elvis was 19 years old and had been waiting anxiously for weeks to hear back from Sun Records after his first recording session. Every day, he would sit on his family's front porch, watching for the mailman, hoping for any word from Sam Phillips about whether his recording had any commercial potential. On that humid July morning, Joe Henderson had walked up to the Presley's small house on Alabama Street, carrying what looked like an official business envelope. "Got something here for Elvis Presley," Joe had announced with a smile. "Looks important. From Sun Records." Elvis's hands had been shaking so badly he could barely open the envelope. Inside was a contract offering Elvis $5,000 to record 5 songs for Sun Records, along with a letter from Sam Phillips saying he believed Elvis had tremendous commercial potential. It was the letter that would change Elvis's life forever, transforming him from a poor kid driving a truck for Crown Electric Company into someone with a real chance at a music career. Joe Henderson had watched Elvis read the letter, had seen the tears of joy and disbelief in the young man's eyes. "Good news, son?" Joe had asked. "The best news of my life," Elvis had replied. "This might be my chance to really make something of myself." Joe Henderson had been genuinely happy for Elvis. "I've been delivering mail in this neighborhood for 6 years, Joe had said. "I've watched you grow up, seen how hard your family works, how much your mama believes in your music. If anyone deserves a break, it's you. Over the years that followed, Joe had continued to deliver Elvis's mail as his career took off. Fan mail, royalty checks, offers from record companies and movie studios. Joe had brought them all to the Presley house with the same care and attention he gave every delivery. Joe had taken pride in Elvis's success, often telling other residents on his route, "I delivered the letter that started Elvis Presley's career. That boy's going places." When Elvis became too famous to live in the old neighborhood and moved to Graceland in 1957, Joe had lost touch with him. But Joe had continued to follow Elvis's career with the pride of someone who had played a small but important role in making it possible. Now, 17 years later, Elvis was face to face with the man who had delivered the most important letter of his life. "Mr. Henderson, please tell me what happened. How did you end up living in your mail truck?" The story Joe told was heartbreaking, but unfortunately common among long-term postal employees. Joe had worked for the U.S. Postal Service for 32 years, from 1942 to 1974. For most of that time, he had been promised that his long service would be rewarded with a pension that would allow him to retire comfortably. But budget cuts and mismanagement had left the Postal Service unable to fully fund its pension obligations. Instead of the $240 per month Joe had been promised, he was receiving only $89 per month. Combined with his Social Security payment of $67 per month, Joe's total monthly income was $156, not enough to afford rent, food, and medical expenses. "I tried to find part-time work," Joe explained, "but at 63, with a bad back from carrying mail bags for 30 years, there aren't many jobs available." Joe had lost his apartment 3 months earlier when his landlord raised the rent. He had been staying with various friends and relatives, but he didn't want to be a burden on people who were struggling themselves. "I still had keys to my mail truck from my years on the route," Joe said. "I figured I could sleep here while I tried to figure out something more permanent." Joe had been living in the postal truck for months, using public restrooms and the facilities at the post office to maintain his hygiene and appearance. "Mr. Henderson," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion, "why didn't you contact me? You know I would have helped." Joe's smile was sad but dignified. "Elvis, you became one of the most famous people in the world. I didn't want to be the old mailman asking for handouts from someone whose success I just happened to deliver." Elvis felt a profound sense of shame. Here was the man who had literally delivered the opportunity that launched his career, and Elvis had never followed up with him, never made sure he was taken care of. "Mr. Henderson, you didn't just deliver a letter. You delivered my future. Without you bringing me that contract, none of this would have happened." "I was just doing my job, Elvis." "No, you were doing much more than that." Elvis remembered now how Joe had always been more than just a mail carrier. He had been someone who genuinely cared about the people on his route. When families were struggling, Joe would make sure their benefit checks arrived quickly. When children were waiting for birthday cards from grandparents, Joe would hand-deliver them with a smile. Joe Henderson had treated every piece of mail like it mattered because he understood that mail often carried people's most important communications: job offers, love letters, family news, and dreams. "Mr. Henderson, you're not spending another night in this truck. You're coming home with me." Joe tried to protest, but Elvis was insistent. "You delivered my dreams to me 20 years ago. Now it's my turn to deliver some security to you." That night, Elvis took Joe Henderson to Graceland and set him up in one of the guest rooms. But more than just providing shelter, Elvis wanted to understand the scope of the problem affecting postal workers. Over the next few days, Elvis learned that Joe's situation was far from unique. Hundreds of long-term postal employees were facing similar challenges: inadequate pensions, limited health care, and no support system for dealing with the physical toll of decades of mail delivery. Elvis established the Joe Henderson Postal Workers Support Fund with an initial donation of $300,000. But Elvis didn't want this to be just another charity. He wanted to address the systemic problems that were creating hardship for postal employees. Elvis hired investigators to examine how postal service pensions were managed and what could be done to improve benefits for long-term employees. He also began advocating publicly for better treatment of postal workers, using his celebrity platform to bring attention to the challenges facing mail carriers and postal clerks. The impact was immediate and significant. Elvis's advocacy led to congressional hearings about postal worker benefits. The publicity surrounding Joe Henderson's situation sparked public outrage about how America was treating the people who delivered the mail. The Postal Service Reform Act of 1975 increased pension benefits for long-term employees and established better health care coverage for postal workers dealing with job-related injuries and illnesses. More importantly, Elvis created ongoing programs to support postal workers. The Joe Henderson Centers provided career counseling for postal employees approaching retirement, healthcare assistance, and social programs to help workers transition to post-career life. Joe Henderson became the first director of the Memphis Joe Henderson Center. At age 63, instead of living in a mail truck, Joe was able to move into a comfortable apartment and find new purpose helping other postal workers navigate retirement and career transitions. "Elvis didn't just help me," Joe said in a 1976 interview. "He helped me help others. He turned my personal crisis into an opportunity to serve the postal workers who were facing the same challenges I faced." Joe worked at the center until he was 70, helping over 500 postal employees access better benefits and retirement planning services. The impact of Elvis's intervention extended beyond Memphis. By 1978, Joe Henderson Centers had been established in 15 cities across the country. The model of providing comprehensive support for postal workers became a template for supporting other federal employees as well. Elvis's advocacy also led to the creation of the Postal Workers' Bill of Rights, which established standards for working conditions, benefits, and retirement security for mail carriers and postal clerks. Joe Henderson continued to work at the center until his death in 1982. His funeral was attended by over 800 people, including hundreds of postal workers whose lives had been improved by his advocacy work. Elvis delivered the eulogy. Joe Henderson understood that every piece of mail he delivered might be the most important thing that person received that day. He treated every letter, every package, every delivery with the same care and respect. Elvis looked out at the crowd of mourners, many of them postal workers wearing their uniforms in tribute. "Joe delivered my first record contract, but more than that, he delivered it with the understanding that it might change my life." That's how Joe approached every delivery for 32 years, with the recognition that mail carriers aren't just delivering paper and packages, they're delivering people's hopes, dreams, and connections to the world. Today, the Joe Henderson Postal Worker Support Fund continues to operate nationwide. The fund has provided assistance to over 15,000 postal employees and has been instrumental in securing better benefits and working conditions for mail carriers across America. There's a memorial at the Memphis, Maine post office that reads, "In memory of Joe Henderson, who understood that delivering mail is about delivering hope, and who taught us that every worker deserves dignity in both service and retirement." The story of Elvis and Joe Henderson reminds us that success often depends on many people whose contributions seem small but are actually essential. Joe Henderson didn't write Elvis's songs or manage his career. He simply delivered a letter with care and professionalism. But without that delivery, Elvis's career might never have happened. 20 years later, when Joe needed help, Elvis remembered the man who had played such a crucial role in his success. Elvis could have simply gotten Joe an apartment and considered the debt paid. Instead, he chose to create lasting change that would help thousands of postal workers who had dedicated their careers to serving others. Sometimes the most important thank you isn't just helping the person who helped you. It's making sure their entire profession is treated with the respect and security they deserve. The measure of gratitude isn't found in grand gestures, but in remembering that every person who contributes to our success deserves to be remembered and cared for when they need help. Joe Henderson delivered Elvis's dreams in 1954. Elvis delivered Joe's dignity and security in 1974. That's how gratitude is supposed to work, not as a one-time payment, but as an ongoing commitment to the people who made our success possible. If this incredible story of postal service dedication and career-changing gratitude moved you, make sure to subscribe for more amazing true stories about recognizing the value of everyday heroes. Share this with someone who works for the Postal Service or who believes that every job, no matter how ordinary it seems, has dignity and importance. Have you ever received a piece of mail that changed your life or known a postal worker who went above and beyond? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for more inspiring stories about the people who deliver our dreams.